Hello, everybody, and welcome to the RMC Alumni Association's Trailblazer podcast. Canada's military colleges build future leaders for Canada and for the world. This podcast is all about celebrating the college's many notable alumni and their accomplishments and milestones. It's a platform for them to share their stories and for us to learn from them. My name is Alexandra Evershed. I'm a senior partner with Prospectus Associates, a national public affairs firm, and I'll be your host today. Today, we're doing a special edition of the Trailblazer podcast. It's special in a few different ways. Rather than our usual audio format, we're doing this podcast with video. Our topic is special too. It concerns the submission made by the Alumni Association to the Canadian Military Colleges Review Board. And as you can see, I'm joined today by three trailblazers rather than our usual one. George Lundy, Scott Stevenson, and Michelle Mullen, all of whom are serving on the board of the association. Our guests today have blazed trails in the military, in the private sector, and in the federal public service. Let me share some highlights. George began his military career at RMC Saint-Jean in 1985. After graduating from RMC in 1990, he served in the Royal Canadian Navy on the West Coast in various ships and then was posted to a staff position at Naval Reserve Headquarters in Quebec City. After releasing from the regular force in 1998, George completed an MBA at the John Molson School of Business at Concordia University and a program on artificial intelligence at MIT. George has worked as an executive in the steel wire industry, the electrical industry, and the PVF, pipes, valves, and fittings industry, where he works today. He served as a director of the RMC Foundation and served both that organization and then the merged RMCAA in a variety of roles. He's presently chair of the board of directors of the RMCAA. Welcome to the podcast, George.
Thank you, Alexandra.
Scott graduated from Royal Roads Military College in 1988. He received a Master of Public Administration from Queen's University in 1999. Following nearly 15 years of service as an infantry and intelligence officer in the Canadian Forces, Scott joined the Federal Public Service in 1999 with a position at Finance Canada. He then moved to the Department of National Defence in 2001, where he served as an executive in progressively more senior positions until 2013, when he left D&D to become a Senior Assistant Deputy Minister at Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada. From there, Scott went on to serve as a Senior Fellow at the University of Ottawa's Graduate School of Public and International Affairs, as a Senior Advisor on federal real property portfolios, and working with the Canada Lands Company on projects to optimize the value of underutilized assets. Scott was appointed to the RMC Foundation Board and served that organization and then the merged RMCAA in various roles. He's currently chair of the Advocacy and Promotion Committee. Welcome to the Trailblazer podcast, Scott.
Thanks, Alexandra.
And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Michelle. Michelle graduated from Royal Roads Military College in 1991 and has since completed postgraduate studies in business technology at Boston University, the Canadian Security Studies program at the Canadian Forces College, and the Senior Executives in National and International Security program at the Harvard Kennedy School. She began her military career in 1987 as an air transportation and movements officer in the Canadian Forces, and was awarded the Canadian Forces Decoration in 1999. Upon leaving the military, Michelle worked as an IT consultant in the private sector prior to joining the federal government as a director at Treasury Board Secretariat in 2005. From then until now, she's had a distinguished career as a public servant in progressively more senior positions, working at the Communications Security Establishment and serving our country from Washington as the Senior Canadian Cryptologic Representative to the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command, and at our embassy. Michelle returned to her D&D roots in 2022 and is still working at the Department of National Defense as a senior executive. She serves the RMC alumni community as a director on the board of the RMCAA. Welcome to the podcast, Michelle.
Thanks very much, Alexandra.
Well, I know that you have a lot of interesting material to take us through, so let's just get right to it, shall we? Over to you.
Great. Thank you, Alexandra. In May 2022, the Honorable Louise Arbour delivered a report to the Minister of National Defense, the CDS, and the Deputy Minister that, and I paraphrase, examined the institutional shortcomings and structural impediments to a cultural shift in the Canadian Armed Forces. In response to your recommendations, two in particular that have a direct impact on the CMCs, we, as an alumni organization, were compelled to act in a manner that we felt provided the best opportunity to influence a positive outcome of the pending recommendations from the CMCRB. The approach we adopted was and is a deliberate, measured, and fact-based approach that respected the process as well as maintained the professional courtesy required to minimize conflicts of interest by members involved and impacted by the review. Our objective was and remains to, as defined in our mission statement and specific to the investigation by the CMCRB, is 1, enhance, preserve, and promote the experience, history, traditions, and culture of the Canadian military colleges, and 2, to promote and advocate for the foregoing. We are 100% invested in the CMCs, but to be clear, we're not interested in defending the status quo. While we are convinced that Canada needs its military colleges, we know that cultural and systemic change is needed to ensure a safe and inclusive experience for all those that commit to the CMC program. The CMCs were conceived 150 years ago to train, develop, and prepare a cadre of professional leaders with the necessary competencies to lead others into combat. This distinguishing characteristic from every other institution of higher learning in Canada cannot be overstated and is a characteristic and role that is still today required to lead a professional military. The mandate of the CMCRB writes a defining chapter in the Canadian military college history. The work we have done culminates in a set of recommendations. Our desire, the Alumni Association's desire, is to share what we are convinced is a useful, timely, integrated approach to achieve the pressing need of renewing the CMCs. 4 key beliefs form the basis of our recommendations to the CMCRB. 1, CMCs need to be centers of excellence for leadership and military/security research. 2, the colleges have a responsibility for cadet well-being. 3, CMCs require a holistic cultural transformation to help eradicate misconduct. And finally, the colleges cannot do it alone. They need broader CAF support. I'll now turn your attention over to Scott, who will present the approach we took to building a renewal strategy.
Thank you, George. Over the next series of slides, I'll outline the approach we took to this strategy, and I'll reinforce some of the points that George has made. As the Alumni Association, for every person who's attended a Canadian military college, we knew that change is required and that change would have to be set out in a deliberate and thoughtful way. And that we would be stayed focused on the purpose and intent of the colleges. This purpose to prepare leaders for the Canadian Armed Forces who can go on into Canadian society to make a broader contribution after their military service is founded on this essential element of preparing leaders who are prepared for armed conflict. The mission remains the same since RMC was founded through legislation in 1874. We recognize, though, that change is required. Change focused on addressing the root causes of misconduct that allowed misconduct to take hold systemically and to be tolerated within the culture. On the next slide, the 4 points that George made about the focus for our work focused on the role of the Canadian military colleges, the belief that the colleges have to be responsible for the well-being and development of officer and naval cadets, that a transformation is required that is holistic, and that by changing the culture at the Canadian military colleges, we can also affect the broader culture of the Canadian Armed Forces. That these are really at the root of what we set out to do in formulating this plan. On the next couple of slides, I'll describe how we organized ourselves to take this fact-based or evidence-based approach. Because the Alumni Association is a small not-for-profit organization with limited internal resources of our own, we made sure that we could mobilize our resources and acquire expertise beyond what we have internal to ourselves. We did a competitive procurement process through a request for proposals to engage a research and analysis partner to help us with this work, and selected the Boston Consulting Group from that process. Their background and expertise in a field, part of their practice includes global defense human resources, and this was particularly useful for us. We, through a staged approach, examined the issues that are identified in Justice Arbour's report, and the issues that were tasked to the Canadian Military Colleges Review Board to examine. We gathered evidence, particularly from our membership, from the alumni membership, because these are the people with lived experience of the Canadian Military Colleges system. But we also relied on the experience of other military colleges or service academies in other countries. On the next slide, we describe how we guided our work. It sets out the members of our steering committee that we asked to help guide our work. We deliberately sought out a range of perspectives, knowing that within the alumni community, we have a common set of experiences and perspectives. And so to get at this work in a way that would be based on evidence and it would be thorough, we sought out researchers like Dr. Alice Aiken, who was one of the founders of the the Institute for Military and Veterans Health Research. We sought out senior officers with military backgrounds in Canada, but who had not attended military college, like retired Rear Admiral Rebecca Patterson, Senator Patterson, and Lieutenant General Christine Whitecross. We also, in engaging Dr. Wanda Costin, we were looking for somebody who is clearly a leader in terms of promoting inclusion and diversity, but who also happens to be a graduate of the United States Military Academy. And so somebody who has a common set of experience, but also a broader perspective. Dr. Nancy Tabor, as a critical feminist scholar, brought a perspective that is distinct, that is unique, and that is critical, but that was also where she has common operational experience with the Honorable Aaron O'Toole, because the two of them had served together at one time on squadron. And then finally, on a Sea King squadron. And then finally, Eric Windler, as the founder of Jack.org, an advocate for youth mental health, and who has direct experience in advocating for and addressing the root causes of youth suicide. This diverse team brought experience and helped to guide and shape the work that was conducted to prepare our submission to the review board, and it was led by Michelle, who I'd now like to turn to outline the submission itself and how we got to it.
Thanks, Scott. We're obviously very proud of the work that was done by this esteemed steering committee and by our partners at BCG, and we've been anxiously awaiting the opportunity to share it with a wider audience. I'm confident that you're going to find that our recommendations are well conceived. Our 7 propositions were formed using evidence-based research, as we did not want to rely solely on anecdotal evidence based on our own experiences at the colleges, since we recognized that each experience occurs at a specific point in time and is affected by both internal and external environmental factors. Instead, we set out to gather empirical evidence for a wide array of sources, including but not limited to more than 1,400 alumni survey responses, 40-plus targeted interviews and small focus groups, more than 200 alumni submissions ranging from emails to full class submissions, and benchmarks from allied academies and private institutions. Allow me to nuance our research findings a little bit. While we certainly received a wide range of perspectives from our membership that included divergent opinions on the matter, we have based our recommendations on the majority opinion, drawing from the general consensus, while still acknowledging the more extreme views that exist on either end of the spectrum. In some cases, where we've had to draw inferences from the data due to limitations in acquiring additional contextual material, we have noted it as such in our footnotes. Although we did not explicitly study the attitudes towards the issues at hand through a generational lens, we did note that earlier cohorts did generally seem to hold more positive views of their CMC experiences than more recent classes. This might be an interesting area for further study in order to better quantify generational trends. As well, our research did not identify the specific academic or extracurricular programs of respondents, so we were not able to attribute higher levels of stress or pressure to specific courses of study, beyond acknowledging that the balance of academic, military training, and athletics is already beyond the demands placed on students at civilian counterpart institutions. Our research has shown that the CMCs have been critical to the development of leaders for the CAF. This program, at its roots, is about preparing future leaders to handle their roles in an increasingly complex threat environment, with the ability to lead effectively both at home and abroad, in situations that range from domestic response to environmental crises like forest fires and floods, all the way to international conflict, requiring either peacekeeping, tactical training support, or even full combat roles. Alumni overwhelmingly agree that their time at the CMCs prepared them well for leadership roles in the CAF. By building lifelong relationships and creating an enduring network, both in the military and beyond in civilian life. By developing core life skills such as coping with stress, problem solving and communication, and preparing them to overcome and surpass challenges. While some CMC cadets find themselves graduating during times of relative peace and stability globally, others have graduated at times when Canada is either at war or when the CAF is being called upon to respond to a domestic or international crisis. And graduates seem to take what they need from their training and experiences at the CMCs. One example during my era would be the class of 1990, some of whom were immediately deployed to Oka, Quebec, as platoon commanders to intervene in the quickly escalating land dispute involving the Mohawk people. Later known as the Oka Crisis, in which 2 people died and over 100 were injured, these classmates found themselves thrust into unfamiliar roles, on home soil, leading troops that had never experienced domestically the kind of escalating violence they faced then, in an environment where they couldn't actually use the conventional weapons or methods taught in their occupational training to defend their positions. Instead, they needed to remain calm and steadfast in the face of agitated protesters, who were literally trying to goad them into reacting and further escalating the situation. I remember watching the TV footage on the news as a bandana-masked protester named Lasagna screamed into the face of a young soldier who held perfectly still, remaining calm and respectful. I reflected on how my experiences at Royal Roads would prepare me to lead in situations like this less than 1 year later, and how different those responsibilities would be from those of my high school friends who would graduate from UBC or SFU the next year, taking up professions other than the profession of arms. It's clear that not every officer and naval cadet looks back on those years fondly. There is no denying that there is a pressing need for change in the culture at the CMCs. Our research showed, among other things, that females and non-binary grads are 2 times more likely to face discriminatory behavior, such as unwanted sexual contact, harassment, racism, bullying, or hazing. And 2/3 of graduates in the last 10 years indicate having experienced mental health or wellness challenges during their times at the CMCs. While this is just a sample of our research findings, we have much more data that illuminates the degree to which cadets have had negative experiences rooted in disrespect during their times at the colleges. And as such, the RMCAA acknowledges and fully supports the critical need for systemic change at the colleges. Many of our alumni believe that nothing short of the complete elimination of all instances of sexual misconduct at the colleges will suffice. While we certainly agree that this is an aspiration that we must always strive for, we also acknowledge that such cases are not isolated to the CMCs. They happen on civilian university campuses as well. The RMCAA asserts that zero tolerance for sexual misconduct is a more attainable goal, as does the UN. Unfortunately, the CMCs are a microcosm of society, and instances like this do happen in society, but it's how we respond that must fundamentally change in order to create a safe environment that is conducive to learning for all officer and naval cadets. In short, we must never minimize, ignore, or excuse sexual misconduct. Renewal is not only positive for the CMCs, but also for the CAF. If done right, the CMCs can proliferate a positive culture across the CAF, as this is the only place where a significant proportion of the officer cadre are together for a prolonged period of time. Notably, there is a place for strict and rigid leadership in the field when lives are at stake, but officers also need to learn to lead in ways that fit the situation. Training officer and naval cadets in adaptive leadership and in what healthy sexual relationships look like at the colleges would enable them to contribute directly to positive cultural change in the CAF once they graduate and join their units, by modeling more inclusive behaviors and fit-for-purpose leadership attributes. After all, teenagers become adults, and the approaches they learn during their formative years will follow them into adulthood. CAF teams are becoming increasingly more diverse, and having a foundational source of positive leadership examples can have a compounding effect for the CAF, as younger individuals often follow suit with those that go before them. Indeed, the vast majority of alumni, over 81%, agree that the CMCs are where foundations must be laid to enable truly lasting cultural change across the CAF, and diversity of thought is an important element of that change. Our benchmarks show that some service academies are seen as beacons for positive leadership and development. For instance, West Point is known for being the center of excellence for leadership. It's been referred to as the CEO factory, having trained many CEOs, government officials, and business leaders. Graduates find remarkable success in salaries, and it ranks among the top academic universities in the U.S. West Point shares many similarities with the CMCs, both positive and negative. It utilizes a 4-year undergraduate degree program, combining athletics with military training. They also employ a cadet wing to enable experiential leadership opportunities for officer and naval cadets, affording them the opportunity to learn from their mistakes when lives are not at stake. However, they, like the other U.S. service academies, have not been without their own challenges around sexual misconduct and harassment, and have garnered negative media attention and public pressure to make significant changes. While we recognize West Point has more funding and prestige, there are some robust guardrails now used at West Point to ensure positive leadership experiences amongst cadets, which could also be applied at the CMCs. Through renewal, the CMCs also have the potential to become sources of light or inspiration for leadership development in Canada. Okay, now that I've set the context for our work, I'm going to shift gears and share with you our recommendations for a renewal strategy for the CMCs. The Arbor Report acknowledges the role of the CMCs in shaping both Canadian heritage and our national leaders, but it also makes the case for change. Recommendation 28 identifies the cadet wing construct as the origin of many instances of misconduct, including abuse of power. Our perspective is that the value of the cadet wing brings as a sort of experiential test bed for leadership skills remains a critical element of the formation of young CAF officers, but that significantly improved guardrails are required to minimize or even eliminate opportunities for harm. Recommendation 29 identifies the need to quantify the costs and benefits of continuing the CMCs as undergraduate degree-granting institutions against the drawbacks. Our perspective is that the CMCs have formed an important part of the fabric of Canada. As we built this nation, we must not revere its historical value without acknowledging the harms that have resulted for too many cadets. Instead, we must make a concerted effort to evolve their approaches to fit with contemporary societal norms, because we believe that when you know better, you do better. We have structured our recommendations to relate to the following broad categories: the CMC's purpose, their program structure, the cadet wing, instructors and staff, equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy, grievances and mental health policies, and quality of life for students. Over the next 7 slides, I'm going to introduce each proposition and then go into detail on its constituent recommendations and share with you the supporting research that contributed to these suggestions. Proposition 1, the purpose of the CMCs. Our recommendation is to recenter the focus of CMCs on their original purpose, to develop future CAF leaders, and to modernize the 4 pillars to better reflect contemporary leadership doctrine. The majority of alumni believe that the pillars need to be modernized by first adding a foundational pillar of character and professionalism that cuts across the original 4 pillars, teaching cadets that acting with strength of character includes stepping up as a bystander, witnessing wrongdoing, and coming to the defense of a victim of maltreatment without fear of repercussions. Revamping the military pillar to introduce adaptive leadership skills rather than strictly command and control. Development of key leadership competencies upon which cadets will be assessed once commissioned CAF officers is critical. And broadening the current physical fitness pillar to include health and mental fitness as a way of building the most resilient leaders. Proposition 2, program structure. We recommend the retention of the CMCs as degree-granting institutions with the hallmark ROTP program and explore adding a 1-year program for other officer streams. We believe it's important to retain the CMCs as degree-granting institutions because of the importance of delivering military-specific programs, such as applied engineering, military and strategic studies, international studies, space science, and organizational psychology curricula that cannot be found anywhere else. Maintain the full duration ROTP program, as it takes years to build enduring in-depth skills, broad situational experience, and trusting peer relationships. And consider adding a prerequisite program for officers in other entry schemes such as direct entry or ROTP CDU to form a true CAF leadership training center of excellence for all, becoming the cornerstone of the CAF officer training curriculum. We cannot stress enough the importance of having a pipeline of security-cleared officers with specialized education and training in military systems and approaches, as we enter this period of unprecedented investment in the defense of North America in these times of increased threat. The defense policy-driven investments of Strong, Secure, Engaged, and more recently Our North Strong and Free, will only serve to ratchet up the demand for graduates with these highly specialized fields of study. Furthermore, there are still many communities in Canada that have low rates of university enrollment, and the ROTP program is an important way to ensure that successful students from those communities can earn the opportunity to attend university on a full-ride scholarship basis. Canadian students whose academic averages are high enough and who have well-rounded interests and accomplishments should be able to continue to count on the ROTP program as a way of self-propelling in life without taking on debt and with the guarantee of a career path post-graduation. Proposition 3, cadet wing. We believe it would bring value to reorient the cadet wing structure to become an effective mechanism for adaptive leadership, peer review, and to set guardrails to limit opportunities for the misuse of power. by first refreshing the cadet wing to better embed principles of adaptive leadership, by increasing rotations in leadership roles to provide breadth of experience and balanced exposure to different leadership styles throughout the academic year that are fitting of the circumstances, by adding mandatory leadership capability assessments of junior roles as selection criteria for more senior appointments, and applying peer review of cadet wing performance for more senior roles. We would like to see the shifting of sanctioning authority to the training wing instructors and coaching senior cadets on performance evaluation processes and outcomes, as well as conflict resolution techniques that will be used frequently in their CAF careers. Applying a rehabilitation, not retribution lens to individualized performance assessments, providing tools to support remedial training through peer supports where required, and formalizing feedback mechanisms such as 360-degree feedback for cadet leaders and supporting them in making adjustments to their default leadership styles through situational adaptation. It's critical that cadets learn how their leadership affects those around them, rather than simply trying to please their superiors and complete their tasks. Proposition 4, training staff. Our recommendation is to increase the quality of training staff by attracting, training, and incentivizing those with a strong record of leadership and mentorship, and maintaining that elevated quality over time. We would improve the cadet-to-staff ratio by expanding the sources of training wing instructors in an enduring way, despite broader HR and budget constraints, and ensuring more strategic governance is applied to career managers to prioritize resource allocation to these positions. We would raise the quality of instructors via selection criteria and incentives that prioritize the influence on cadets and have candidates earn the privilege of playing such an important role in the development of future officers. And we would expand leadership training and coaching for instructors that go beyond the direct military experience and are aimed at collegiate-level students, vice adult soldiers with life experience. Proposition 5, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We recommend the strengthening of accountability for and incentivization of EDI initiatives among the cadets, staff, and instructors at CMCs to foster a truly inclusive environment where everyone belongs, because inclusion is about belonging, not fitting in. As one of the early waves of women going through Royal Roads in 1987, which was incidentally the last of the 3 colleges to accept women, I was acutely aware of the need to fit in if I wanted to succeed. There were plenty of signs all around me that not everybody wanted women at the college, and I always felt the need to prove the naysayers wrong, rather than simply being unabashedly who I was and being confident in my hard-won right to be there. We would like to effect these changes by developing and publicly sharing a more cohesive EDI improvement strategy and publishing explicit leadership commitments, expanding the recruitment pool to be more diverse through targeted value propositions aimed at lowering the barriers to entry for diverse communities, improving the retention of diverse populations via tailored interventions and community outreach, and developing key performance indicators to measure EDI success. One example of a targeted value proposition for attracting recruits from specific communities would be changing the imagery used in advertising certain career roles and programs of study, such as cybersecurity, which often depicts threat actors as dark, hooded figures, hunched over keyboards, and swashbuckling defenders taking them down. For a society that's built on immigration the way Canada is, we need to recognize that members of certain communities have left behind their war-torn homelands and will naturally pull away from anything that is reminiscent of law enforcement or an authoritarian regime. So swapping these dark images out for more positive ones that illustrate problem solving or staying a step ahead of adversaries might make the job sound more attractive to women and girls, and even communities that have been marked by war may be more open to their children applying to the CMCs and to CAF. Proposition 6, grievances and mental health. We believe that the new CAF framework on grievances and mental health must consider the CMC's unique context in order to deter harmful behaviors by developing and rolling out more holistic prevention programs, provide broad exposure to GBA plus approaches, and consider the needs of all equity-seeking groups across the CAF. Develop an investigative policy that respects CAF's framework but still considers the CMC's unique context and demographics. And strengthen mental health programs and support to ensure that stigma is reduced around leveraging these services. I was struck by the responses of alumni on this issue, with 72% believing that peer pressure, legacy practices like hazing rituals, and a lack of appropriate adult role models or supervision on college grounds around the clock are responsible for the higher rates of discriminatory behavior than at other colleges. And finally, Proposition 7, quality of life. Our recommendation is to review all elements that contribute to a healthy student life and invest in bringing these elements up to an acceptable standard to enable cadets to thrive in their academic experiences, vice just surviving it. We believe that CAF must review academic offerings to be more tailored to CAF's current requirements, the needs and interests of prospective cadets, and the CMC's ability to deliver them. Invest in major physical infrastructure upgrades, despite budget constraints, to create a top-tier experience to attract top talent. Further, develop campus alcohol and substance abuse policies and intervention programs to reduce the instances of substance-related incidents. And review and adjust broader CMC rituals, policies, and procedures to improve physical and mental well-being, such as locking doors, day passes off campus, and adaptive measures to enhance living conditions. In a recent RMC survey, almost half of current cadets agreed that the living quarters were subpar, detracting from the power of the boarding experience. This is especially true of access to technology like Wi-Fi in today's times. The RMCAA would welcome the opportunity to collaborate on ways to amend the current policy limitations and governance models to prevent the use of publicly raised, donated funds for major capital infrastructure investments on the RMC campus. As is the case for most civilian universities, our alumni would undoubtedly step up with financial support for major undertakings to improve the living quarters, recreational facilities, and the sporting infrastructure such as an arena, if there were a legal mechanism such as the Corporation Saint-Jean to enable this type of philanthropic investment in the college grounds at RMC. Some form of public-private partnership would be a welcome addition to the infrastructure landscape of the CMCs, and we hope to see more of this cooperative investment approach result from this review process to enable the kinds of change that are needed despite the current economic climate. Other important distinction between the CMCs and their civilian counterpart institutions is the inability to turn to international students who pay elevated tuition costs to attend for a financial boost. In their role producing future CAF officers, the CMCs must of course limit attendance to Canadian citizens that are eligible to enroll in our armed forces as a prerequisite. There are also national security considerations involved in teaching elements of Canadian military strategy and the specifics around weapons and other systems that are unique to the military, to anyone of a different nationality. Sharing deep knowledge of these capabilities with foreign students would certainly put national security at risk, and as such, having a mechanism through which alumni can contribute financially to infrastructure improvements might be the best opportunity to boost the operating budgets of the CMCs during these times of fiscal restraint, as is currently done for some extracurriculars such as the battlefield tours and other events supported by the generosity of alumni. So those are our 7 propositions for renewal in a nutshell. With that said, I do want to acknowledge the current constraints faced by the CMCs. The CMCs are managing the same compounding challenges faced by the CAF, attracting qualified candidates in an ever more diverse society, and doing so at a time when fiscal restraint is causing budget reductions and changes in workforce expectations are putting pressure on the government and the private sector alike. Given this environment, more work needs to be done to both cost these renewal strategies and then prioritize them amidst competing imperatives, both of which fall outside the purview of the RMCAA, but for which we would like to be a part of the solution. Now I'm going to pass things back over to Scott to go over the next steps and to reiterate the key messages and to conclude our formal presentation. Scott?
Thank you, Michelle. As we explained and as George explained at the outset, our primary audience for this work has been the Canadian Military Colleges Review Board. The opportunity that we had to meet with them in June and then to provide them with a formal submission document as they concluded their public consultations has really been the focus of our work. However, as a member-based organization, we've been also focused on keeping our membership informed and engaging them in this work. So the presentation that Michelle has walked through here that we shared with those who attended our annual general meeting, we're hoping it will reach a broader audience of our membership through this podcast. At the same time, we know that the review board's work is going to flow to the Minister of National Defense as the decision maker on how to respond to their recommendations in considering the future of the Canadian military colleges. So our next steps are to ensure that the key advisors around the minister are aware of the perspectives that we put forward to the review board. And then early in the new year, we would also want to provide that information directly to the minister. We would also anticipate that other stakeholders in the defense community should be informed by us of the perspective that we have and that we've articulated in this renewal plan. Overall, our desire, the outcome that we seek, is to address the root causes, the systemic and cultural causes that allowed abuse to persist at the Canadian military colleges. The colleges are national institutions where a core of new leaders for the Canadian Armed Forces and for Canada can be shaped. And we believe that renewing the Canadian military colleges is an opportunity to have a lasting impact on improving the overall leadership, culture, and the quality of leadership in the Canadian Armed Forces and in Canada as a nation. So those are the really the key messages as that we want to bring home, and that we're grateful to have this opportunity, Alexandra, through this podcast to be able to communicate to a wider audience.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for this great presentation, George, Michelle, Scott. It's clear that this project represents months and months of dedicated work by many people. So thank you so very much for that work and for sharing the findings with us today.
Our pleasure. It's important work.
And Alexandra, if I can just take a second, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to Scott and Michelle for their exceptional leadership over the past 2 years on the critical project of addressing our response to the CMC review board. Their dedication, professionalism, and unwavering commitment to this complex and vital undertaking have been truly inspiring. They navigated challenging discussions with clarity and purpose, ensuring that our association's response was thoughtful, thorough, and aligned with the values we uphold. The work leading to the final document and presentation has strengthened the future of our institutions and demonstrated the best of what collaborative leadership can achieve. So, thanks again to both Scott and Michelle for a job exceptionally well done. Thank you.
I would say that the RMCAA has a lot of reason to be proud of the trailblazers that are here with us today, sharing the results of a mountain of work. So thank you. I have another question for you before I let you get back to your extremely busy lives. You've provided a lot of details for our listeners, our viewers, in this brief overview. Is the full report going to be available to all members?
All members of the association, yes, absolutely, and publicly as well. Scott could probably speak more broadly on that specific topic.
Our website has been the key tool that we've used to reach our members, and we have a section on there around our work on Canadian Military Colleges renewal, and so there is a easy to find point on that website to access the full submission that we made to the review board and the presentation that we made, the presentation that we made to our members at our annual general meeting. So yes, the documents are available. I'd also note that they're available in French as well.
That's good to know. And I know that other people may have been doing what I was doing during the presentation, which was leaning in and trying to read the fine print. So it's nice to know that the presentation too is available on the website. So thank you for that. I'm going to stop us here. You've been very generous with your time. Thank you so very much again for joining us. And thank you to all the listeners and viewers for tuning in. We're going to call this a wrap.